Welcome to I Have Some Questions. The show is all about asking questions our guests have never asked themselves before, never thought about, or been too afraid to explore. It's designed to uncover the human story at the root of successes and failures and help us as an audience learn and grow from that story. My hope is that you'll hear brilliant guests exploring new ideas and challenging themselves in new ways of thinking. I think this makes for great conversations. I'm going to bring on entrepreneurs, authors, coaches, scientists, and frankly, any vein of super interesting, successful, and passionate human I can find. I am fascinated by passionate people, and I have some questions for them. I'm Erik Berglund, and I hope you'll join me every week for new episodes. Welcome back to I Have Some Questions. I'm your host, Erik Berglund, and I wanted to take a few minutes in this episode just to review the interview that I did with Kim Willis earlier this week. I had a great conversation with Kim. We talked for about 90 minutes and really went deep into selling. You know, I don't get to interview many sales professionals. I interview a lot of leaders and business owners and entrepreneurs and coaches, subject matter experts for sure. But, you know, selling, I think, is one of those things that is often misunderstood. And Kim and I got to go really deep, diving into things like what is the difference between an average salesperson and really top-end sales talent? And it isn't what most people think. If you aren't a sales professional, most people think that an excellent salesperson looks something like Harvey Specter or, you know, some televised, dramatized version of someone who's excellent at verbal jujitsu. It's got to be Don Draper. And that's not it. Don't get me wrong. Those salespeople exist and they might be very great as well. But the real difference between an average salesperson, who, by the way, is still probably pretty good at what they do and is still excellent to have in your company. I'm not knocking an average salesperson. But the real difference between an average salesperson and an excellent salesperson, Kim and I decided were 3 or 4 things. Kim's primary addition was an average salesperson doesn't often have the fire or the hunger, that internal drive and ambition. That's a characteristic that he's identified in true top-end sales talent. And I added that I think there's some combination of curiosity, process, and technique focus that really separates a great salesperson from a good one. And if you lead salespeople or you're regularly around salespeople, you can see that. Your expert salespeople, they take the time to prepare. Your expert salespeople, they take the time to do the research necessary to be successful. They obsess over the particular words they're going to use or the particular questions that they are going to ask. They're very dedicated to their process because that's what they believe drives success, and they are incredibly curious. They can't help themselves but wonder deeply if what they're trying to sell will really help the people they're sitting across from. So that's one of the areas we weren't really deep on. I thought that was a lot of fun. And because at its core, the way Kim ended up describing it later towards the end, which, by the way, if you haven't listened to the episode, highly recommend it, especially if you're in sales or lead salespeople or around salespeople often. The way Kim described it was his job as a salesperson is to get to the truth. You know, that's where that curiosity came in, I think, where you just can't help but be curious if what you're really selling is really the best thing you can do for that person across from you. What's the truth of the problem that they have? And what's the truth about how well you can solve it for them or help them with it? And often when you get to the truth, you realize I'm not the right person to help them, or I don't have the right solution, or they have a problem that doesn't fit with the solution that I have, right? They're puzzle pieces that don't fit together. They're both good. They just are incongruent. They don't add up. But that obsession with the truth, really treating sales as a process where you're trying to get to the truth of the problem someone else has so you could potentially help them solve it, I thought that was a fun particular aspect of the conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to marinate on that truth aspect a little bit more. And the last thing we talked about that I thought was fascinating was, you know, how do you really get your salespeople better? Now, Kim starts the interview by describing this process when he was 18, learning to sell books door to door for this religious organization in Sydney, Australia. And he describes how miserable he was at it, how bad he did at first, but that it was the effect of a coach, someone who was excellent at what he did, who went out with him, listened to the calls that Kim went on, and came back and sat him down and coached him through the 2 biggest changes that he needed to make. And in that process, that concept came back again and again in our interview. This, how do you actually get salespeople to get better? Well, you have to listen to their calls and you have to give them feedback. You have to be willing to put them in situations where they might fail and not save them. Don't make the sale for them, which is often the flaw that sales leaders have, right? I can say this as we here because I was a sales leader. We get in the room and want to close the deal. We need the revenue. We have a goal to hit. But to really get your salespeople better, you need to expose them to potential failure and maybe even failure itself, and then use that as a catalyst for helping them drive change. The two big observations that Kim's coaches shared with him were that he wasn't asking enough questions and that he wasn't really doing a job of telling a story. He was rattling off facts, but he wasn't creating a narrative around it. Those are two powerful truths for any salesperson. You need to be good at asking the right questions, and you nearly need to construct a story that has some logical semblance to it so that the person, the buyer, can really envision themselves going from, I have this problem, to I no longer have this problem, and what got me there is your solution. But at its core, getting people better at anything, getting salespeople better at selling, is about that feedback. It was about putting him in a position where he would respect and hear the feedback he got so that he could make changes and go perform better. And he was a shy 18-year-old who really didn't think he wanted to be in sales, was ready to quit, and then has spent his entire career as a master salesperson, leading sales teams, building companies, entering new markets, building businesses, and it all came from that powerful coaching that he got at a young age. So how do you get people better at things? That was a topic we went deep in. Giving them feedback is important. We also talked a little bit, I guess there's a fourth bonus thing we talked about here that I thought was pretty cool, how when you're in sales, especially outbound sales, when you have to go create markets, and that's a distinction often people don't understand, the difference between inbound and outbound sales. Inbound sales people respond to an interest that already exists. Maybe they respond in their office, responding to phone calls or emails or leads. Maybe they respond by going out and meeting with the customers, but they're fulfilling a known need. The industry is aware of a problem and they have a solution that they just want to make sure people consider. That's an inside salesperson. I'm not knocking that. I'm not putting it down. I'm just qualifying what it is. An outside salesperson has to go create opportunity. You have to go tell people they have a problem you can fix for them. You have to go convince people that the problem that they have is sufficient to warrant your attention, that they should meet with you, even though they maybe had never previously thought that they had a problem that needed solved. That's what a lot of entrepreneurial is. That's what a lot of entrepreneurship is. It's creating a solution to a problem people have yet to realize or, substantiate in their lives. And when you do that, the thing I thought that was cool that Kim shared, when you do that, you kind of create money out of nothing. It's almost like a magic trick. You create cash flow, revenue, right? You create revenue streams. You generate economic activity out of nothing. And not because you swindled somebody or took something away, but because you created something that was more valuable than the money they gave you. That's the trade that happens. I thought that was a pretty cool perspective too. It kind of made me stand up a little bit straighter and recognize, I do love that. I love the feeling of creating something out of nothing and it being good for everybody. Anyway, it was a fun interview. I hope you'll give it a chance to listen to it. If not, I hope these points about getting to the truth, what defines a really good salesperson, how you get people better at things, and how you create value out of nothing. I hope those are interesting enough answers to questions for you. They certainly were for me. I'll see you next time. I'm sure I have more questions for the next guest. Thanks for joining us this week. Don't forget to take a second and subscribe. Maybe even share this episode with somebody it made you think of or someone you think would take some value from it. This show is all about uncovering the brilliance and humanity of high performers. And whether those performers have a massive following or a podcast or a book, when they're a business owner, or they're buried somewhere in a corporation, or maybe they're a nonprofit leader, or they don't necessarily have to have a title. I'm really fascinated by people who are passionate and who are doing interesting things. So if you or somebody you know would be a good guest, don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email at hello@languageofleadership.io to make that connection. I'll see you next week.